Talk about dehumanizing. The first thing we want to look at is the middle passage. Now, how many people here, raise your hands, have heard of the middle passage? Okay. What is it? Tracy.
That's a part of the slave trade when the Africans were brought over from Africa. They came through the Middle Passage on their voyage to America.
Now, when we talk about that, the first thing we want to focus on is really just the boat ride and what went on during that boat ride. You see, at this time, you had kings and queens and successful individuals who were over in Africa. You see, but when they were on that boat, they were just a black face. These queens were raped. These kings were killed and thrown over the boat. This is all the beginning process of the dehumanizing of the black Americans. Now, when they arrived here, it was slavery. And we could talk about the negative things that went on slavery, but the next thing we want to talk about is decivilizing. How were these blacks decivilized, and what does it mean when they were decivilized? It means that these blacks were forced to or began seeing themselves as heathens. They began seeing themselves as these monkeys who were swinging in the trees in the jungles in Africa. This is what it was designed to do. Sorry about that. So now we want to talk about slavery. And there's two things we typically hear about slavery, and one we don't. We typically hear about the slave trader, individual who traded the slave. The slave master, individual who owned the slave. But the one we don't typically hear about is the slave maker. You see, the slave maker is the individual that took the African away from the individual. He took the culture and removed it. He took the names and removed it. He took the traditions, removed it, the religion, and removed it. You see, people like to give credit to, or contribute this to Willie Lynch. I'm pretty sure we've all heard of Willie Lynch letters in there, or for the most part. But see, it wasn't just Willie Lynch. It was an ideology of that time period about individuals who saw blacks as heathens. So what was done after everything was taken away from the black Americans? You start replacing it. You place it with the European traditions. You place it with the European names, the culture, the holidays, the language. This was all done. This is when you begin to see the names, or Africans being named Smith, not Imhotep, not Takufu, Williams, Johnson, Anderson. You begin to see these names. Now, what came about now as we move forward, we want to talk about Negro. We've all heard this term Negro, right? If we look at the census, we can still see Negro on there, if you want to check that box or not. But what is a Negro? Barbara.
I have no idea.
Clyde.
It means black in Spanish. I mean, but it just means a black person, I guess.
It means black in Spanish, you're right. Now, Negro has no connection geographically to anywhere. But this is what we allowed ourselves to be called. We called ourselves this sometimes. We presently still allow ourselves to be called this. So what came next after Negro? Actually, let me rewind a little bit. Because Negro derives from Negroid, which is a group of individuals who have no civilization. So to be honest, if you decivilize somebody, and you take away that culture and their traditions, it's a Negro. It's just another word for slave. Another person who's not humanized, or has been dehumanized, or been decivilized. So what came next?
Was it colored? No, or were we black? Oh, Negro.
We'll come to all of that.
No.
We'll come to all those arguments. But African American.
Okay.
You see, we want to call this a politically correct term, right? But how is it that during slavery we weren't allowed to have anything related to African? We were stripped of everything African. We were stripped of the names of Africa, stripped of the religion in Africa, the culture in Africa, and we're beaten for calling ourselves African still. You're not an African, you're a slave. You're not an African, you're a beast. This is what was being called, blacks were being called at this time. So why was it okay after all this was done that blacks were allowed to be called African again? You know, we can say that there's, politically correct and because we want to get back to our heritage or we want to get back to these roots. These roots were beaten out of us. These roots were raped out of the women. Because they don't want to talk about, we're not going to teach about what really went on during slavery. About how that woman was raped in front of her husband and kids and then impregnated by the slave master. And then once she got too big and couldn't work anymore, the slave master would force her to have an abortion, cut her stomach open, rip the baby out, stomp the baby to death. We don't hear about how black men were buried up to their neck and dogs would attack them, how they were skinned alive. You see, we don't hear these stories about how mothers were forced to have sex with their own child, about how a man was forced to have sex with his own daughter, because they were breeding these people. They weren't humans. They treated them like animals. And what do we do to dogs now? We breed dogs. Crossbreed them, inbreed them. That's what we do. And it's the same thing they did to black people at that time period. Sorry, I'm getting a little hot now. Now, Coon. How many people heard this word, Coon? What's it short for? Raccoon. A subhuman creature. Portrayed blacks as lazy, childlike individuals who were unequipped for freedom. Not educated enough to be free. You see, during slavery, you weren't allowed to be educated. You were beat for getting educated. You were beaten because you weren't educated. Because you knew how to read, you were beaten. Because you spoke properly, you were beaten. You were taught to hate education. And then you're labeled as a coon. You're blamed for not being educated, and you weren't allowed to get educated. Brute. I ain't heard this one, brute. You've heard that? Now, brute portrays blacks, at this time, portrayed blacks as violent, strong beasts who ran around and terrifying, helpless white women. You see, this is the image they promoted about this brute caricature. But the question we need to ask ourselves is, why white women? You see, at this time period, white women were considered America's prized possessions. They made movies about this. Birth of a Nation. Who's ever seen that movie?
What time period is this?
What?
What that you're talking about?
We're talking about after slavery.
Okay.
So that whole, we can go 1800s, early 1900s. Excellent. You see, these brutes were accused of raping white women in epidemic numbers. But why was this being talked about? Why was this being done? What does this do? What it does, it puts fear in the minds of the black community. Because what they were doing was creating these stories about this brute caricature. And they were killing blacks at this time in high numbers, lynching them, putting them in prison for false reasons. All done after slavery to make sure they still feel that they are enslaved, that they can't be civilized, that there are always going to be these beasts, these brutes who terrorize innocent victims. It was a means to keep segregation, or to keep America segregated. Now, the next thing we want to do as we move forward is talk about the South. See, we typically blame the South for racism and slavery. We don't typically talk about slavery in the North. There was slavery in the North. We don't typically talk about segregation in the North. There's segregation in the North. There's segregation in the West. You see, we relate everything negative to the South. In the South, it was Jim Crow. Only thing different in the North, it was just unspoken. It wasn't spoken about. You see, these individuals knew that it was segregated. Was it overtly, like the South? No. Very covert. And it's still covert today. It's see, I heard this quote once, that the only difference between racism in the South and racism in the North is colder in the North. That's it. So what do we do about that? So what was done about that? You know, you had, what came next was pretty much the civil rights movement. Now, how civil rights taught? What do you typically hear about when you learn about civil rights? What was that? Martin Luther King. Chris, what did you hear about when you talk about it? Huh?
Martin Luther King. Malcolm X.
Who's that, Cody? Malcolm X? Who else?
The Black Panther Party.
Rosa Parks? Okay. These are all things we typically hear about. We hear about the Voting Rights Act. We hear about the marches. We hear a lot about the marches. We hear about the unity, people coming together. We hear about the powerful sit-in movements, or they're portrayed as being powerful. We hear about the boycotts. We hear about people getting out there and making a difference. And there was a lot of national press for this stuff too. We even heard King's I Have a Dream speech. You hear that every February. Around, yeah, every February.
Oh, February?
Yeah, that's the only time I choose to listen to it. But the thing we have to understand, there's two sides to every argument. Oh, three sides. Their side, this side, and the truth. You know what? I'm going to tell you about another side. The side you don't typically hear about in schools. The side that shows how civil rights hurt the black community. Because that's a side that you don't typically hear about in schools or read about in the books. But there was a lot of frustration. So when we see civil rights at this time, and we talk about the unity, and we talk about Martin Luther King, and we talk about Rosa Parks and the sit-in movements. That's the thing I want to talk about first, though, the sit-in movements. You see, I talked to this guy before I wrote this lecture, who was around at that time, period, who didn't really agree with the sit-in movements. Now, previous to talking to him, I didn't agree with the sit-in movements either. And here's my reason why. I don't see power or strength in sitting there getting beat on. I don't see it. I don't see why you would promote an integrated lunch table when you could promote black businesses, when you could promote economic equality in your own neighborhood. So you see, I relate this to a bully. Now, there's something we're hearing about a lot today, is bullying. Imagine if your son was getting beat up. Would you tell him to suffer peacefully? To be nonviolent, or would you tell him to defend himself? Defend himself? See, we all can agree that you would tell him to defend himself. But when we see these images on TV, or we see these images in movies or in books, what are we thinking? That that's powerful? Only thing that's doing is portraying a race of people as weak, cowardly. You see, we're not allowed to talk about how there were militant individuals back then. Or we're taught a certain thing about militant individuals of that time period. Aren't we taught that Malcolm X was a violent individual who promoted racism, who promoted everything negative you could think of? But was he really violent? Did he ever attack anyone? Or did he preach about and speak about defending oneself? That you don't need to go and try to have a lunch table integrated. Keep that money in your own neighborhoods. Bring some type of economic equality into your own neighborhoods. I don't see how an individual who just spoke out against injustice, you see, he didn't give his opinion, he gave facts. That this was what was going on. It was racist. He talked about it. He didn't sugarcoat it. But are we taught that in schools? So we have to ask ourselves, did civil rights hurt long term? And I just want you to just sit with that question. And I'm going to come back to that one towards the end. I wrote this piece once on integration. I just asked the question, was integration truly the way to go?
No.
I agree with you. Now, with integration, you're getting ahead of me. It's killing me. Now, with integration, what do you have? You have two parts that meet in the middle. Supposed to. You know, I relate to the way to simplify it, you have A and you have C. They come together and make B. That's integration. What this country did was take A and C, and you made A minus. That's the only thing that happened. You see, there were a lot of individuals who spoke out about integration at this time. Even people who were at one time for integration. Martin Luther King said, in response to Harry Belafonte's question as what was troubling him, Martin Luther King responded by saying, I feel I have integrated my people into a burning house. How many people heard that quote? One person. How many people have heard the I Have a Dream speech? Everybody. Why is that? Why are we only taught one side of an individual?
To stop the whole truth from coming out.
You heard this quote. I heard somebody say something about Martin Luther King that I don't know if it was presently or in the past or how far back in the past that there's going to come a time that Martin Luther King was going to wake up from that dream. And that's not to take a shot at Martin Luther King. But I think saying a quote like that towards the end of his life is powerful. W.E.B. Du Bois, who once agreed with integration, changed his mind because he said, I did not want to see black culture be submerged, be forgotten about, be lost in translation, be forgotten about, because that's all integration did. We don't talk about the schools that integration shut down. You see, when we have 3 black kids that go to a white school, we want to call that integration. Sounds like tokenism to me. But we want to call that progress, right? When you send a white kid to an all-black school, you call that progress? How come when we come to talking about, when the argument comes up about ethnic equality or racial equality, it starts with this cookie crumb progress. Now, desegregation was great. I will admit that. Desegregation was a hell of a thing. But integration stopped and prevented a lot of equality. These schools that were shut down. These teachers that lost their job. These kids that had to travel countless miles to go to school to receive an education where they weren't being educated properly. They had to sit in the back of the classroom. In some instances, they made them sit outside the classroom, but we're not talking about that part. So I just want to ask the question, was integration truly the right way to go? Why? Just yes or no?
I don't think so.
Rita? Is that how you say it? How you say your name?
Clyde.
No, behind you.
Portia.
Portia? Oh, I thought that was a D. I'm sorry. Shantae? Shantae.
No.
Barbara?
No.
Carla?
No.
Tracy?
No.
What's your name? Megan?
Yeah. I believe it was the right way to go.
Okay. Shayla?
No.
I pronounced it wrong. Angelica?
Angelica.
Oh, my bad. I'm terrible with names, I'm sorry. Angelica. No, it's a tough question.
I don't know. I'm in the middle.
You got the middle?
Yeah.
Okay. Carla?
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm with her in the middle.
Jordan?
I'm in the middle too. I see like, you know, whatever way that we would have took to go and fight this, it would have led either way, both difficulties.
Jake? Oh, Paul? That's all. I see that. Who's Jake? Oh.
That's a smart year.
Well,
I agree with
Chris?
So I think it's a good idea.
You think it was the way to go?
I mean, I think you had to go that way. I mean, it's not saying it's the perfect way at all, but
You said it was the only one? Okay. I'm gonna come back to that one actually. Cody?
I'm glad they did it, but I think they did it too quick.
I agree with you. Melissa?
I'm kind of in the middle, I'm not sure yet.
Okay.
Kind of wish I'm kind of about all this
Okay.
a little bit.
No problem. You don't got a name, John?
Yeah. I'm in the middle too.
Okay. Brittany?
Yeah, I don't know yet.
Okay. Tyler?
I agree with what Cody said, that we kind of rushed too quick.
Alicia?
I'm like kind of confused. Are you asking, do you think that we're asking if,
Integration was the right way to go.
like, for schools?
For America.
Like, just
As a whole.
being able to, even being right here, like, having people of color, like, in here?
If you want to relate that to
In, like,
integration, you can.
2012? Like, I'm sorry, I'm confused.
As a whole, we're saying that at that time with integration, now, you're thinking of, this is desegregated. This is desegregation. This isn't integration. See, I think people commonly get the two confused. So we're allowed, there's blacks in this classroom because of desegregation. And ruling is that word. Integration means you combine,
Blacks and whites.
pretty much. Segregation means you just can't divide.
Well, I don't believe in being colorblind, but, I mean, yeah, I guess I agree with it.
That was the right way to go?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think,
No?
I think no.
Liz?
I think not completely no, but more no than yes.
Okay. Greg?
I say no.
You got a name, Chad?
Just Jamaica.
Tamika.
This is something I've been thinking about for a while, believe it or not. I still have not come to, I don't know, I really don't. There's times when I agree, Cody, that we did it too fast. There's times where I feel like it should never happen, but there's times also where I'm like, it had to happen. It's gonna happen. It was just a natural progression of things. So I don't even know.
Okay.
I think it should be gradual. I think a lot of work still to be done.
Robin?
I think the concept is good, but I think we might have went it the wrong way.
that is that.
Zach?
Integration, yes, it is good and necessary. It's a good idea to work toward. But there will always be a struggle. And there'll always be something we have to fight with.
Now, what Cody said, not Cody. Chris. No, Chris, I believe you said that it was the only way to go. Is that what you said? You see, the way I look at it, was desegregation was, you know, one of the greatest things that happened in America. I'll stand behind that. But the thing I believed, instead of integration, and a lot of people disagree with this one, at the time period, because like you said, it was rushed, separate but equal. You see, a lot of people might disagree with that though. But this is why I agree with it at the time. You can't force love. You can't force somebody to see you as their brother when they thought you was their enemy for over hundreds of years. So what does separate but equal do? It allows that people to rise up for themselves, to create for themselves. It creates this idea that these people can take care of themselves. They don't need to be begging for anything. They don't need the handouts. You see, so was it rushed? I believe it was rushed. It was something that people believed had to happen.
Which is the screensaver.
Freak me out.
What's the things somebody said over you?
So that I do stand by that. Now, what I said earlier was, or just a few minutes ago, was that these schools closed down. And the schools that didn't close down, that are still predominantly black and Hispanic and receiving an inferior education, kind of led me to another piece that I wrote. And I asked a question. Does the education system promote racism? Now you see, there was a few ways to look at this one. First thing I want to do is just define racism. You know, we can give you so many different definitions of what racism was, but I'm going to give you the first definition I learned. A group that believes they are inherently superior to any or all other races. The most basic definition. You think you're better than somebody because of the color of your skin. Pretty much. Now, in school, we have to ask ourselves, what's being taught?
Like history.
Pretty much. We hear about great Europeans or European Americans, George Washington, Christopher Columbus, Thomas Jefferson, all these individuals, John Adams. So we have to look at two things. Take a black kid, take a white kid. When that white kid's in school, he's hearing about these great accomplishments. Subconsciously, he's thinking that the group I belong to are powerful, superior. Now, this isn't something he's consciously thinking. But the first time that black kid hears about his people, what's he learning about? Slavery. His people enslaved, chained, shackled. You see, you build self-esteem to these young kids. There's power in seeing the group you belong to racially as being successful or being powerful. You see, so this black kid's getting his education in these schools and thinking, these people are powerful than me. These people are better than me. They enslaved my people, or people that look like me. Why? Why is it that they enslaved our people? Why don't we learn about history outside of America? We learn about individuals who came here, but we don't learn about Africans that came here. We don't learn about Africans in different countries that came here, or Africans that were here with the Native Americans. We don't hear about those Africans. So this kid is subconsciously getting his education that he is inferior. And the reason I say this is because, like I said, I'm no psychologist at all. But I don't think it takes a psychologist to just observe and think. But you know what? I can put myself in them shoes. Because this is how I felt when I was a little kid. Because the education I received in just a regular public school, I just want to be white. And I can admit that. Because this is the education I received. I wanted to be like those individuals who conquered countries. I wanted to be like those powerful individuals who faces on the dollar bill, who faces on all the money. I mean, black faces on the money. Now, I don't say that, there's nothing wrong with, talking about these individuals. There's nothing wrong with that. Because this is what they actually did. But let's tell the whole story. Let's tell the story about how George Washington traded a black person for some molasses. Let's talk about how in the Constitution it says that black people are 3/5 of a human. Let's talk about that stuff. Let's talk about how Thomas Jefferson owned slaves. How Abraham Lincoln was a racist. You see, we're not talking about that Abraham Lincoln, who was quoted as saying, I didn't free slaves, or he just freed slaves to preserve the Union, or something like that. Something along those lines. He didn't want to make politicians out of black people. He didn't want to see black people marrying white people. We're not talking about that Abraham Lincoln. We're not talking about that George Washington. We're not even talking about that Thomas Jefferson. Now, what's that experiment? The Clark dog experiment? Is that what it is? The dog experiment? The Clark?
Brown?
Brown? No, the dog's green.
Doll. Oh, the doll.
Dog, yeah.
I mean, it's been done many different times, but the black and white, we watched a clip of it, we're all replicating it.
So you got about seen it, right? Let me ask you this question. Do you think it'd be the same results today?
Are you talking about the historical one?
Yeah. Do you think these black kids still idolize or relate everything positive to being white?
Yeah.
Do you think the education system promotes that?
Of course.
Now, do people disagree with this piece? Of course. Because I'm not to say that everything I say is right. Only thing I'm doing is just telling the other side of the story. Do you think the education system promotes racism? I'm going to go across one more time.
Yes.
Yes? I think I'm just thinking first.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. You do?
Yeah.
Are you asking?
No.
They only teach us what they want us to know.
I still don't feel that it's not just a black and white issue in this country, but that's very dominant into what it's made out to be. That it's simply just a black race or white race issue, and if a person of mixed descent. I learned that there's a lot of history not being taught. There's a lot of things not being given the young people the opportunity to expand their minds. So I mean, racism is definitely taught in the school.
Most definitely.
Tracy?
Yes.
I don't know why you even come over here. You know we all
There you go. Yes. I'm not saying names this time, so I'm messing up everybody.
Yes.
Yes.
No? Is it Haifa?
I feel, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
I think it started out as it was a way to teach what we want to teach. That way we can stay in control. And I think after a while, though, as generations went on and we started, integrating whatever, it became about people teaching what they had been taught, what they were familiar with. And that, I guess we will call that laissez-faire racism, because they're just not breaking out a cycle. They don't even think about it anymore.
No.
Zach. Yes. Okay. Now, I got this piece, or this thing off the computer not too long ago. It happened the day after my birthday. What it was, teacher calling black students future convicts in New Jersey. Those 6 and 7-year-olds.
Wow, that's early.
Man. Because they were acting out. She went to an inner city school and expect these kids to be well behaved. Heck, she went to any school and expect little 6 and 7-year-olds to be behaved. Forget the inner city, Kids is bad around that age. So.
You said 6 and 7 or 16 and 7?
6 and 7.
6 and 7.
Oh my God.
And the thing about it, she posted this stuff on Facebook. Saying these kids are future convicts. They need to be on Scared Straight. It's not.
6 and 7, like
That's what I'm saying. But the thing about it, though, is there's teachers like that all around the country, black and white. You see, we can't just say that these are just white teachers saying stuff about black kids, because it's black teachers saying it about black and white kids. Exactly. Me personally, I used to work at a facility in Pittsburgh, at Atlas U. But most of the kids were black and Hispanic. But they heard all these stories that we're talking about, they've heard it all. They've been called it all. Teenagers, menace to society.
Because they are. It don't matter what color they are. They're all bad. It don't matter.
I agree with
white,
you.
red,
Bad is bad.
bad is bad.
Good is good. See, we typically associate color with what's right and what's wrong. It's just like she said, Dr. Weinzimmer said earlier, that a man smashed a woman's head or whatever. Oh, they thought he was black. How many people here thought he was black though when they heard that? Just first instinct.
I honestly don't.
1, 2.
Right, right.
Yeah,
You like it.
inside.
Oh.
Why do you have to watch?
Yeah, you
In
like
public, like.
You know what I mean? Because first off, most black individuals that will be in that type of area that you would be in, nothing against you, they would have a tendency to realize that they would be under observation and they would be staying out. So the tendency to do something that stupid, you know, in public, no.
Basically, if you wasn't there, they would have went home together.
Yeah.
But since you was there,
Yep, pretty much.
All right. Now, next thing I kind of want to talk about, just moving forward, is the media's bias. You see, the media is comfortable with showing negative images of minorities. Real comfortable showing these images. Historically, they were comfortable showing it. Now they're comfortable showing it. We are comfortable watching it. Only reason they're allowed to show it is because we allow them, because we watch it.
I only watch cooking shows, thank you very much.
Well, except Barbara.
And I don't care what color you are, if you can cook.
I agree with you. I went to culinary school myself, so you know, I love cooking. That's another story. Now, how these stories are promoted. It's like she was talking, like Dr. Weinstein was talking about earlier. Welfare. Now, who do we typically associate welfare with?
White black.
It should be
It's
associated.
actually,
Actually,
it's
that's-
statistically white people on welfare than there are.
I know that.
So that's why.
And it was made for white.
But who do we typically associate with it? Though? You know,
I'm a black woman.
you know, I had this conversation once.
It's not rocket science.
Sit down real quick.
You sit on the table, make yourself comfortable.
But no, I had the story. I heard the story once, and then I actually did sit down and I heard this. And this girl told me. She said that welfare is a form of reparations. That's why black people. That's why the majority of black people are on it.
Who said that? I'm sorry.
This friend, I'm not gonna.
Oh,
I'm being
okay.
recorded.
Just a friend. Okay.
But she had this conversation with me and was genuinely said she learned this in college.
Wow.
University of Cincinnati. I put the college out there.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
See?
We have a whole history of talking about Cincinnati. It's a tough issue for us.
We are not that bad.
Yes, you are. I live in Cincinnati. Now, when we get to the point where we talk about them race riots,
Right.
But she said this to me, like I didn't know any better. Like I didn't know about welfare, so you know what I had to bust out the statistics for. 46% of people on welfare now are white. I believe around 20 for black and 20-something for Hispanic. But you see, we don't hear about that. We don't hear about food stamps. Now, you know, black people are on food stamps. White people on food stamps. People on food stamps. Some people need a hand.
No.
But the idea that we typically associate these stereotypes with black people, why? Because it shows we want to portray people as lazy, childlike, who can't take care of themselves. What word did I say kind of had the same definition? Coon. That's just that's how black people are viewed. They just don't want to say it. So they tell them to get them off of welfare. And they tell them that they're lazy, childlike, uneducated. Now, next, BET.
What did you say?
BET.
White on.
What? BET's white on? It is. You didn't know that?
I didn't know that.
I just know Deborah Lee.
Yeah. She's just a face.
Oh, wow.
But let's talk about BET for a second.
Make
Huh?
sure everyone knows BET is.
For what?
106 and Park.
What time is that show recorded?
What?
What time is that show recorded?
I don't remember. It's not live. It's
No.
before.
Record.
They recorded the shows the day before.
Yeah, do you remember what time though?
I don't remember. It's
Midnight?
been
It afternoon, is it?
It's afternoon, around there. Why
I'm
people,
on 6 every day, but.
why people
Well,
should be
no
in
one's at
school.
home.
What
This
show
is
is this?
106 and Park. This show is recorded while those kids should be in school. It's the same thing when TRL's on TV. That show is recorded while kids were in
Well, but it
school.
comes on at 6 o'clock every
Yeah.
day. So, I mean, it would be when after school.
That show's recorded in school. It's not live.
She said
No, I know.
shows.
Oh,
It
that.
shows,
Oh,
like, it
okay.
shows everything
Yeah.
at 6 o'clock.
Okay, gotcha. But what do we see in the music industry specifically? And I'm gonna show some videos.
What do they call those rooms?
Spinners. It's been a few years since they showed spinners on TV.
We don't watch the videos no more.
Dressed women. But what the black male, what image do they glorify?
Gangster.
Thug, gangster, drug dealer. Do we watch it? Do we like it?
No, we don't
No.
watch it. No, we
Except for
don't
these
like
three
it.
right here. Do we watch it and do we glorify it and do we kind of say, sing along the songs?
They do. The kids do. The
kids
ones
do?
that watch it, they do.
My son wants to. No.
But my thing is, when we're watching these videos and we're seeing these people and we go out and imitate them, what are we doing? Like it's okay. You tell me the difference between what was done in minstrel shows when black people making buffoons of themselves on stage.
I like that video, pull your pants up.
Hands on the ground.
No, pull your pants up. There was a young rapper who went around and he did videos in the schools, and he would tell the kids, pull your pants up, and he would talk about how, I don't know who it was. I just saw
That's
it
that Reese
on
book song, I believe. Yeah.
And he had these girls dancing from school, and it was really cute.
Yeah.
He was telling them to pull their pants up and where it came from. It was a very positive.
Does BT show it?
Probably not.
If you don't come on Food Network, I don't know. Either that or the computer, one now.
There you go. Well, these videos are promoted on BT. Supposed to be black entertainment television. Who are they entertaining? Who are they educating with this stuff?
White people to what they expect and to think of other black people.
Did I not just say that we're comfortable with seeing these images on TV? Are we comfortable with seeing positive images? And that's sad. We're not comfortable seeing positive images on TV as black people. Because who buys the music? The majority of people that buy the music.
White people.
Black people gotta burn something. Hey.
He buys it on the internet legally, and then
There
he
you
makes
go.
his own CD.
Yeah, being recorded, man.
Trying to help you out here, bro.
Exactly. But what I want to do now is just show these videos, and then I'm going to ask some follow-up questions with it. Can somebody get the lights in the back?
You should be able to see it, but which one do you want? Images or videos? Male and more than
There's profanity in this video. You can tell probably by the title. So, it's going to play like 30 seconds.
Oh, so then it was
This is like a straight YouTube.
I'm Jay motherfucking Rock, nigga, what it do? All red chucks yelling out Super Bowl. Nothing by the niggas that be wearing all blue. That's why I get a pass every time I ride through. East side Bonnie on the watch, that's my click. Niggas sing dog, this nigga, you know the bricks. 90059, you know the zip. Top dog, ride it up, we just gave him another hit. Cause I'm a blood nigga. Red rag until I die, see the brim, see the whole shit, you know we certified. I'm a blood nigga. Diamonds on the rise, flame up across the blood, you know we red ride. I'm a blood nigga. When you see me, better give it up, nothing but a big thing. Homie, we don't give a fuck. I'm a blood nigga. Haters trying to shut us out the door, get you walking, but I'ma keep it blood, yo.
Probably is in the closet. Can I do it?
Wait,
Even David's on.
I like this.
What they doing to the dog?
I'm
But see, when this was made though, and I saw the time period in 2000, that was when like gang violence was at a high, really. And like that's what was actually going on in the community, and they were just promoting it, I guess you could say.
You don't think it's still going on gang violence?
Not as much. It's not as bad as
Just
it
heard a
was.
thing on TV about gang
But
violence.
it's still.
Yeah.
He's from
American
Columbia.
Gangster.
That's right. He's never been to the real city. I'm just teasing you, Clyde.
I think this was just kind of, you know, talking about, I mean, that was Bloods and Crips and stuff like that, though. But is gang violence not glorified, though, still today?
Yeah.
Or gangs, period. You see, we can associate positive things with gangs. There's nothing positive to be associated with a gang. Who's a rapper that claims he's a Blood? Biggest rapper probably in the world right now. Lil Wayne. So-called Blood, right? Promotes this, right? Joined the gang when he was grown, right?
When he was grown.
Yeah, because he was really into school and stuff as a kid.
But anyway.
Oh, that's your baby dad?
Is this new information that he just
What?
came out with? Oh, he's always said he was a Blood?
He's been clowning around for a long time. No offense.
Oh.
But when we see these images on TV, what do we think about when we see these people?
I think that's the way all black people are.
Do we think they're that way, black people?
No, that's not, I don't see that every day in my life, no.
Like, on topic of Lil Wayne, like, he has a psychology degree, and a lot of people don't even know that.
What? It's a lot of rappers that got a degree.
Really?
But the thing is
He's got a degree.
I've heard he's really, really smart, but
yeah.
nobody wants to know that. Everyone wants to see him as with his dreads and like, you know.
A lot of rappers. Dero, I think his name
Well, I'm
is.
sorry, but having a degree doesn't make you intelligent.
Well, I'm just saying he's.
Yeah.
But
I'm not
a
saying
lot of people think rappers is all they know is
Straight from
from
the
the
streets.
hood.
They think
from
they're
the streets,
stupid
but
and
right,
dumb,
somebody
but
that's
they're
really
not,
smart.
because some
He
of
has
them
to
are
have
just
some
using
form
it.
of intelligence to get a degree and graduate from a university.
Yeah.
And I agree with that. But if my thing is, why sell yourself out on a TV screen if you have an education?
Because it's a quick way to make money.
At what point do you have
I
enough
mean,
money, though?
I don't agree with
But
everybody.
Look, hands up
Oh,
too,
okay.
though. Tamika's having enough.
The best way that I know how to describe that is, I don't know if anybody ever checked out Russell Simmons' Death Poetry Jam. He used to come on HBO. But one of the, it's Death Poetry, whatever. Anyway, one of the artists on there, his best way was, when did we start embracing the ghetto when it's supposed to be something that we were trying to get out of? That's the best way I know how to describe that. It's like all of a sudden we decided let's glorify this lifestyle, even if we don't agree with it, which goes back to the whole argument of all these rappers have degrees and psych degrees and they're really smart and blah, blah, blah. But instead of promoting that, hey, let's go out, we're promoting the fact that, we live in the ghetto and we can shoot each other. What? It doesn't make sense. And so, I don't know when that became the norm, but that's the best way I know how to
You talked about when do you make too much money, etc. Even the Bengals player that just got arrested for having, 6 pounds of marijuana. I mean, he thought he was, a thug, and he's making tons of money, just playing football, yet he's living this, thug lifestyle. But now he's turned, witness to whoever sold him the drugs, which is related to some higher up gangs and stuff. So they're, he's kind of chickened out of his little gangster. I can't remember. He's a Bengals.
It's funny how, like, when rap started out, it wasn't that way, and then when they came out with gangster rap, it wasn't glorifying what was like those two just did. It was actually putting out there what was really going on. And then,
It was positive.
yeah,
They killed that.
they killed that, and with the media made it seem like what they're doing now is what it was at the beginning.
And
They didn't
also,
want to hear the positive rap.
Right, they didn't want to hear what was really going on and why it was happening and why they were mad or, but now it's like, because the media made it into the opposite of what it was meaning and what it was saying, that's what they're getting at.
well, it's also who owns the record labels, which are all white men,
Yeah.
and what image they want to promote.
I know you still have
Yeah, I'm gonna mow that one. So, yeah.
But I mean, another thing is too, when you look at these music videos or you see who rapping or whatever promoting it, they wanna promote what they know people is gonna buy and what they wanna hear. It's a lot of producers that say if you don't rap about something that's real or if you went through, then a lot of people is not gonna be able to agree or be able to relate to what you're rapping about. So a lot of these rappers or a lot of these people that sing or that rap, they've been on drugs before, they've been alcoholics and stuff, so they rap about what they know and people that can relate to it so they could be able to buy their music and put it out there.
They relate to it, but suburban kids are the ones buying the music though.
Yeah.
All kids in the suburbs are on drugs too, though.
But like this thug idea, you can never relate to
It's
that?
been
Or they're just comfortable
glorified,
seeing these people acting like a fool on TV and find it entertaining.
I don't know.
Just think about that. Well, hold on, gotta move forward a little bit because I didn't know if that was over there too. But how many people seen this image right here? LeBron James, or magazine. This is for the U.S. Army too. You see, we see. Oh, there's a lot of similarities. From the green dress to something in his right hand to the screen.
Yeah.
Well, we don't talk about this though. We allow stuff like this to happen to us, to blacks. This stuff is allowed to happen. It's allowed to happen. But why? Would they think this wasn't going to come up? Was this just a coincidence? From the colors he's wearing, to the colors she's wearing, to the something in his right hand, to the screaming? This is just a coincidence?
Well, they're gonna, I think sometimes black people especially don't want to say anything because white people are gonna look at them like, oh, well, they're playing the race card. You know what I mean? They're not gonna take them seriously. Like we were talking about in our dialogue groups, it has to be the people that do hold the power, like myself and other white people, have to be like, that's screwed up. Like, you can't do that. You know what I'm saying? Like, we can't publish stuff like that.
You see, that goes all the way back to what I said. It's cookie crumb progress. We were afraid to speak out at one time. And this is the result of that. We were afraid to stand up for ourselves. This is the result of that. You see, everything comes full circle. You answer that, take a picture. I'm not going to do the next one.
You don't want to?
Yeah, you gotta put this on. Now, how many people have heard of psychological slavery? How would you describe that?
Me or her?
You know I ain't raised my hand.
Basically, your thought pattern, how you think, if you still think that you're enslaved mentally, then you are.
What was the goals of slavery? Keep the mind weak and the body strong. You see, when we talk about this psychological slavery, blacks were forced to hate education. Let's look at the graduation rates. Blacks were forced to hate work. Let's look at the unemployment rates. They were forced to think negative. Look at the imprisonment rates. This is all suffering from psychological slavery. They were forced to see themselves as heathens. That's why when a white girl walks in a certain black neighborhood, what do they say? What's up, snowflake? What you doing here, whitey? We still hear this stuff. Why is that though? How are you going to talk about inequality and look how you act? These are all things that come about with psychological slavery. We want to believe that we're free, but subconsciously we're not free up here. We're still chained up here. This is from generations down to generations down to generations. You see, we don't want to have those conversations when we talk about the truth, about where our names really come from. Can't talk about that. Because let's be serious. You got your slave master's name.
Yep.
We are very much aware of that.
But we can't talk about
Ongoing conversation.
Me, I don't. I don't.
Oh.
My dad changed his name when he was 18. I got my dad's last name. Sharif Rasheed.
What is it?
Rasheed.
Rasheed.
So you know what? So that argument, I've always promoted that argument. Now, but you can't tell somebody to change the name. This is my name. This is the name my grandfather gave me. Who gave your grandfather, your great-grandfather that name? Why did he give him that name? Because he took his name and removed it and gave him his name. You see, you weren't the slave Smith or something like that. You were his pet. You were beneath his pet. You see, at this time, you could keep records of when pets were born and when they died. They didn't keep records when blacks were born. They didn't keep records when they died.
It was inventory.
Just a product. The time is running short, so let me just wrap this up real quick. Oh, you can ask questions.
You were going to tell us something about why the African American Association came back. Why is it attached? You didn't finish that thought.
The African?
Why do we think now, yeah.
We want to believe that we have this connection to Africa. Roots made us believe that we could trace our ancestors back to Africa, which is a lie. They're going to tell you that, you know, you get some blood here and you can trace it back here, there, and this, that, and the third. Between the rape and the murder and the records that weren't kept, it's not possible to trace your roots back to Africa. So what did they do instead? They allowed us to call ourselves African American. They wanted to give us some type of confidence that you could relate to Africa. Do I call myself African American? No. I call myself a Black American. That's what I am. Born black, I'm gonna die black. I have no connection to Africa, and it sounds terrible. I have no connection to Africa. Do I want it? Do I wish I had a connection to Africa? I would love it, but I don't. So, when we talk about progress and we talk about equality, we have to be the change we want to see in this world. You know, we have to be the revolution. We have to be the difference, the fighters. It all starts with oneself. You see, I started this movement about be the one change. Because I want to see the equality I want to see, I'm going to start myself. I can't expect somebody to follow me or to expect somebody just to hear what I say and just follow me just blindly. I have to lead by example. So we'll see what comes next. So we have any questions?
Also, make sure you put your, if you want them to follow you.
Well, I have some business cards. I mean, I can handle like a few. Do anybody want one?
Yeah, sure. I want one, but I have a question.
You know we want to go on this side.
That you really didn't go all the way there with. Why do you not think integration was good?
Why don't I think integration was good? Because I think when you integrate, you lose a lot. You lose that black history, that accurate black history.
So you think it never should have happened?
Never should have happened?
Yeah. Because that's what I think I was confused.
No.
I agree with Coon. Have it too fast.
She wanted a card.
It
So
did, I took it as it destroyed our school system. It destroyed our neighborhoods.
What was that?
It destroyed our school system. It destroyed our neighborhoods. It really messed up our neighborhoods. And the businesses that were in our neighborhood were black owned. And it killed them.
Forced to shut down. That's why I still say 99% still pressing the name of segregation. Integration, I'm sorry. You see, we can talk about.
And towards the end of civil rights, they started realizing that integrating the schools was a big mistake. And I just remember my father always saying, when he was a kid, his mother used to always ask him, what makes you think you're going to learn more because you're sitting next to a white kid in a classroom? And he said he never understood it until he saw the change in his neighborhood after integration. Nobody knew anyone. I mean,
You didn't know the
Doesn't make
kids
education
living
better.
next to you.
It doesn't make the food taste better.
Right.
It doesn't make the water taste pure.
Rasheed, I lived through some of that desegregation here in Greenville. And I can honestly tell you, I started out in one school and it bused me to an all-white neighborhood, all-white school. And comparing my books to my next door neighbor's book who wasn't bused, there was a difference.
That's why I said separate but equal. Now, if they were separate and the education system was equal, we wouldn't have these books.
Right.
But that's why I said I agree with Cody that integration was rushed. But
Here's the results of it.
But I just want to say thank you guys for allowing me to come speak to you. I'll be back on Thursday? No, I'll be at work on Thursday. I work at a rehab. I work in a rehab facility. I work at a halfway house. I'm a licensed counselor.
Turn your name cards back in.
Huh? Oh, I got a lot more, but you know, red. So. I live in Pittsburgh.
Are you from Dayton?
Huh? I grew up in Cincinnati.